This building was originally the first University of Quito, which burned down, prompting them to build the new university. What's fascinating is the story in which why it burned down. There's a tradition, I've seen it in Romania, I think I've seen it in Asia, and it's apparently was here, where you would take little balloons, and underneath that balloon there was like a regular flying balloon today was a basket in which there was a candle or a flame, and it would heat the air up inside this light balloon, like a balloon made from rice paper in China would be very light, and it lifts them into the air and they float through the air, and it's very beautiful. But I've often wondered what would happen if these fire balloons, as they're called, landed on buildings. This is what happened. This building got burned out. The museum is dedicated, this portion of it is dedicated to the old indigenous peoples, kind of, not really that old, because they didn't wear hats in the really early days. Hats were introduced from Europe. Around 1538 was when hats might have started to arrive with the Spanish. This museum deals with the labor of those people as well as revolution, which was a constant theme. Even in recent Republican eras, the guide pointed out, they have put down, as he put it, 10 different presidents. Reflects the abuse of the Spanish, but notice the size of those big and powerful hands. Do the masks represent the emotions of the old people looking at this one of theirs so abused? And are the masks also an indication that they had to hide their faces out of fear? A man has been tied and whipped to a tree, and his wife and child stand or kneel or squat over him. It might have been people who were popular and inspirational amongst the revolutionary indigenous peoples. Imagine her life. Imagine the stories she could tell if she could live, if we could extract those stories somehow. We're suggesting that this indigenous woman had confidence and hope in this woman on the left. The artwork that we're seeing here came from the 20s, 30s, and the 40s. It seems very much similar to what I've seen in Spanish and Portuguese artists. I think is neat because we get a picture of the woman who made some of this art, and we'll get a shot right now of her work. And this was her painting that we just saw. In Ecuador are very, very important, as are turbans in India. And also shawls. We'll see in a minute, I think, some paintings that these shawls are not just random artist's choice of colors. They represent the colors of specific indigenous groups. Naked artwork from, I think, the 20s. This I found interesting, these two women resting so closely together in security. But is the backdrop an ocean, or an ocean of hills and grass? Here again, the colors that you see are very specific to the villages, communities, maybe indigenous groups, regardless of what the subject matter is, this one being somewhat interesting. And the purpose of this painting seems to be simply to demonstrate the different colors and styles of clothing. A woman bare-chested, a woman next to her partially bare-chested, and yet these women here, fully clothed. Cultural mores, probably far more defined in their world than in ours. How much we humans empathize with faces. How much they tell us. Look at the petulant beauty of this woman. A curiosity perhaps at the work of the artist. It amazes me how artists can get such feeling. Seeing how we see caricature detail in faces and drawings that we know come from a different culture, that personify a different culture, and yet somehow we relate to them. Perhaps we see elements in ourselves. Up to the second floor, and apparently this metalwork was made in Bolivia, according to our guide. Notice what a pretty environment for a university this would be, particularly considering the caliber of people who went here were used to this style and opulence. These are the faces of some indigenous people, people who, in the recent past, obviously photography, lived in the jungles. This is how we warp that image to play off of the sensibilities of within our own civilization. But here you see normal human beings looking out at us from their life, from their world. Notice the face, it's proud, almost arrogant. All over the world, the indigenous peoples have evolved to either try to remain that way or to remain half stuck in their world and partially entering ours. Strange to us, particularly as the images our media have generated of these people in Tarzan movies, etc., and how we have warped what they might actually have been. This room attempts to preserve the folklore of the indigenous people. So it will have art not by the indigenous people, but attempting to represent their lives. These are various forms of looms that the indigenous people might use. It's interesting to compare these to the looms I've seen in so many parts of the world. Very, very sophisticated, to this that we see in front depicted as very, very simple. And we can see from going from that picture to this drawing how that very simple loom is used to make large garments. Whether they make things like carpets or not, I don't know. The guide yesterday told us what's interesting and not necessarily reflected in what we just saw is that men oftentimes were the weavers. Whether they were the specialty weavers or not, I don't know. Here a woman using a primitive but more sophisticated loom than we've seen with the shuttlecock here. And this work attempting to show I think common fabric. This is what we would call a burlap, a common fabric, because it was used to wrap everything, the vegetables for market, etc., etc. And it may even reflect that it somehow was in these clothes. And these clothes may be definitive of certain groups, like the Reds and the Blacks, certain ethnic peoples. There's a scene on a drum face. Notice there's a bird in the center. A couple of birds flying up on the upper right. It looks like a cat, maybe a leopard with a drum, and some other kind of creature here on the left playing some kind of a harp. And of course a dog at the bottom. This motif of this animal on the left and the cat on the right is replicated on several of these drums. This may represent not only clothes that were typical for some, but maybe some kind of ceremonial costumes also, particularly that center row. And costumes used and instruments during celebrations. Notice the variety of hats here, at least two styles. We may say something similar to that in Otavalo, which is known for its hats, I believe. Quito is here, and sometime soon we will go to Otavalo and to Cotachi, and then up to Ibarra to Caranqui.